On the last episode of the Keepsake box. On that Sunday morning, I went into the kitchen to make breakfast. I pulled the ingredients out of the refrigerator. I was all set to prepare sausages, eggs, and toast. We usually ate regular pork sausages. We had been eating the same kind for years. But for some reason, Mom had purchased sweet maple sausages from the grocery store. The smell of them immediately made me nauseous. Before I could restrain myself, I started vomiting into the kitchen sink. Mom came running out of her bedroom. "Londa, I know you ain't throwing up in my... Shelonda!" I turned to face her, wiping my mouth with the sleeve of my robe. "Yes, ma'am." Mom's voice became extremely stern. "Shelonda, you pregnant?" I wanted to keep holding the secret, but I couldn't. I needed to get it out. I started crying. Without thinking about it, I blurted out that I was sorry. I saw a side of Mom that I hadn't ever seen before. Mom told me that the hardship that I created would be mine and mine alone. She told me that I would never have her husband and that I would raise my baby alone. Mom told me that she wished death upon me and everything that was connected to me. She told me to leave and to never return. I started crying the moment I saw Sharon. Without giving the details of Ron's involvement, I explained to Sharon that Mom had evicted me after finding out that I was pregnant. Sharon took a deep breath and delivered her question. "Londa, are you pregnant by Ron?" Though I was surprised by her knowledge, I nodded yes and asked her how she knew. Sharon took my hand and looked into my eyes. "Ron is my uncle. He got me pregnant when I was 14. My ears processed the words, but my mind couldn't comprehend the information. For some reason, I assumed that I was a victim of circumstance. Sharon asked if I had considered abortion. I hadn't. I had always been opposed to abortion. Additionally, I had no idea how much it would cost. Sharon told me that she would take care of it and that I could stay with her. I had the abortion and it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I no longer had the burden of the hardship that Ron had created for me. Chapter 23. The Signs Were There. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. I settled into a comfortable situation with Sharon. I didn't have to live with Grandma, and I was free to come and go as I pleased. The best part of it all was the fact that Sharon allowed me to use her ID card to visit Ken in jail. I know, that sounds crazy, but it wasn't like it is present day. Sharon had a side profile identification card, and most people didn't care enough to study the details. The plan went off without a hitch. I visited Ken as soon as I was able to do so. I was excited, but life had taught me that no assumptions could be made. I knew Ken loved me, and his court date had assured me that he did not blame me for his incarceration, but I had to be prepared for the possibility that Ken's time away had lessened his affection for me. My heart skipped a beat when I first saw Ken. He had obviously adjusted well to jail life, and he looked much better than he did on the day of his court appearance. Actually, he was gorgeous. He looked like my Ken again. And if I was ever concerned that Ken's feelings had changed, he was sure to put my concerns to rest. He smiled broadly when he saw me, taking away any questions that I had. Ken and I had to talk via telephone, and there was a glass between us, but none of that mattered. I was there, and he was happy that I was there. That was enough for me. As usual, Ken and I picked up where we left off. He told me that I was still his and assured me that we would remain the same when he was released from jail. I didn't tell Ken about the pregnancy. I had promised to always tell him the truth, but I had also promised to protect him. If Ken had been made aware of the pregnancy, he probably would have killed Ron. I couldn't take that chance. I saw Ken for the first time in March of 1997. He was released in the beginning of July. Since I was out of school for the summer, I worked at the salon with Sharon during the day and spent most of my nights with Ken. I was grateful to have been on birth control because I surely would have gotten pregnant again. Ken and I had sex all the time. While I enjoyed the intimacy of being with him, I still didn't enjoy sex. It was no longer physically uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to enjoy it. Additionally, I often flashed back to my situation with Ron. I relived the rapes in my mind when I was in intimate situations with Ken. The worst part was the fact that I couldn't tell Ken that I was uncomfortable. I didn't think he would understand, and quite possibly, he would blame me or react as Mom had. I wasn't willing to face that. Ken and I didn't talk about what happened when he was away, and I was grateful that he didn't ask. I swallowed my feelings and tried to enjoy the good times, and I did. Life was pretty good. All would have been well if our arrangement had stayed as it was, but I guess that would have made the story less interesting. A few weeks after Ken came home from jail, he asked me to move in with him. I'll tell you now, that was not a good idea. However, it's a fact that I didn't make the best of decisions when it came to Ken. Sharon pleaded with me to stay at her place. She never talked badly about Ken, but she openly expressed her concerns. She warned me about the dangers of growing up too fast, but I already felt as if I were grown. I had basically taken care of an entire family when I lived with Mom and Ron, and my newfound freedom made me very comfortable with the idea of being one-on-one with Ken. The crazy thing is, I had a good thing going. I was comfortable at Sharon's and I could see Ken whenever I wanted, but Ken was uncomfortable with the situation. He didn't like the fact that I was often left alone with Sharon's boyfriend, Antonio, and sometimes with his friends. He was concerned that someone may try to take advantage of me, and he would not tolerate that. Antonio hadn't ever approached me in that way, and I had no reason to assume that he ever would. Nonetheless, I accepted Ken's logic, because who would have ever suspected Ron of raping me? Life had taught me that I couldn't put anything past anyone, and I couldn't be presumptuous of anyone's motives. I'm a man, and I know how men think. That's what Ken said, and I went with it. Ken said that he would protect me at all costs, and he had gone to jail attempting to do so. I felt that I owed it to him to take him at his word. There was also the obvious benefit of living with Ken full time. We didn't have to sneak around, and I didn't have to leave. Ken and I loved each other. What was the worst thing that could happen? I moved in with Ken in the middle of July, and everything was perfect. He and I had the best of times together. We laughed and talked about anything and everything. We made long-term plans for our lives that always included us together, just us. It was Ken and I against the world. I didn't realize that I put him in the perfect position to monopolize my entire life. I also failed to realize the mental implications of doing so. I didn't have any friends at school, and I had moved out of Sharon's. I felt that Ken was all I had. He was my savior and protector. I continued to work at the salon during the day, and I spent my nights with Ken. I cooked dinner and cleaned the house. We were our own little family. Ken never let me spend my own money, and we always had what we needed. It was perfect, and I didn't ask questions. Ken had previously told me that his parents left enough money to pay the bills for a while. I guess I assumed that that's what we were living off of. I didn't ask, and he didn't tell. Things were great as long as I didn't ask questions. When I did ask, things didn't go well. One day in early August, I came home from the salon and started dinner. Ken told me that he needed to step out for a while, and he would be back before dinner was done. It was approximately 6:00 p.m. I patiently awaited Ken's return. I became increasingly worried as the night went on with no sign of him. The last time I didn't hear from Ken, he had gotten arrested for assaulting Ron. He finally returned at 2:00 a.m. My worry turned into anger when I realized that there wasn't anything wrong. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick," I screamed. Without any foreseeable warning, Ken pushed me against the wall and put his hands around my throat. "Do you know what it takes to keep a roof over your head?" Ken kept insisting that I answer him, but I was unable due to the fact that I was being choked. I cried in between my gasps for air. Ken loosened his grip just long enough for me to say that I was sorry. I could smell the alcohol on him, and he had the same crazed look that he had on the night that he had raped me in my bathroom. I was terrified, and he knew it. Ken stopped choking me and slapped me across the face. I fell into the floor, hoping to thwart any further attacks. Ken got down onto the floor and straddled my body. He leaned in closely and spoke in a calm and deliberate manner. I do what I gotta do for us. Don't ask any questions as long as I pay all of the bills in the house. Do you hear me? He screamed. I didn't think. I just spoke. I was surprised by the words that came out of my mouth. Yes, Daddy. I was taken aback by my comment, and I thought Ken would be as well, but he wasn't. He smiled and said, Yes, Daddy, I like that. Ken stood and held his hand out to help me up. I thought it to be an inconsistent gesture, considering his previous actions. I took his hand and got onto my feet. Go to bed, he said. It's been a long night. I did as I was told. I woke up the next morning to the smell of breakfast. I glanced over to the nightstand to check the clock. It's 9 o'clock. I was late. On an average day, I was usually at the salon by 10 o'clock. I sprung from the bed and headed towards the doorway. I was met by a smiling Ken. He was carrying a tray containing sausages, eggs, and burnt toast. I smiled stiffly and greeted him with a hoarse voice. I thanked him for breakfast, but advised him that I was running late and I didn't have time to eat. Ken told me that he had already spoken to Sharon and told her that I was sick. He also advised her that I would be taking a few days off to recuperate. Give her a call, said Ken. She's concerned about you. I retrieved the phone from the dresser and dialed Sharon's number. I explained that I had picked up a bug and that I would be back in a few days. The fact that I was hoarse made for a credible addition to my claim. Sharon told me to take my time and to come back when I was ready. I thanked her and decided to spend the day resting. I looked into the mirror on my way back to the bed. There was no wonder that my throat was sore. I had an entire handprint around my neck. I could literally identify each finger. I got into bed and ate the breakfast that Ken made for me. Aside from the burnt toast, it was actually pretty good. Not wanting to anger Ken, I ate the toast as well. Ken spent the following 5 days waiting on me hand and foot. There was such a contrast in his behavior and the way he treated me on the night of the attack. That's why it was so hard to see the bad in him. It was so good when it was good. It's easy to ask why I didn't just move back in with Sharon. She would gladly have accepted me back. And the answer came in 2 parts. First and foremost, I loved Ken. And even though the signs were there, I was able to overlook them because things were so good when Ken was happy with me. I assigned a portion of the blame to myself when I was outside of Ken's favor, and I got lost in the good times. I believed that all would be well if I found the formula for success. I just had to avoid making Ken angry. I didn't understand that my efforts would not have made a difference. That's just who he was. Secondly, I didn't want to hear the inevitable, I told you so. Sharon was good to me, but she ain't cut no corners. She would definitely have had a lot to say about Ken putting his hands on me, as she should have. But as luck would have it, or lack thereof, I didn't have to explain anything to Sharon. I never went back to work at the salon. Ken was happy with me staying at home, and I was happy with Ken being happy. Of course, Sharon tried to talk me out of quitting, but I knew the consequences of challenging Ken. Besides, he said he'd take care of me, and I accepted his word. I told Ken that I was saving for a car, so he bought a car for me. And since I would be outside without him, he purchased a cell phone for me. Keep in mind that it was 1997. Modern-day cell phones were in their infancy, and I was the only child that I knew to have had one. Ken promised to take care of me, and in my mind, he was doing just that. Ken and I spent the following month violence-free. Everything was fine until September rolled around, bringing another unforeseen confrontation. Ken had raped me on the first day of my junior year. My senior year started out equally terribly. It was Monday, September 1st, 1997. It was Labor Day. Ken decided to have a party to commemorate the end of summer. We tag team in preparation for the party. I prepared the food while Ken cleaned and made store runs. The night started out perfectly. Everyone complimented me on the food, and there was plenty. And even though I didn't drink, there was more than enough alcohol for everyone else. I noticed that Ken was drinking a lot more than usual, but I wouldn't ever have said anything. That was his time with his friends, and I knew better than to interrupt. I had spent the day cooking and catering to guests, and I was exhausted. I was supposed to start my senior year that next day. It was already after 12 and far past the point in time where I should have started the cleaning process. I cleared the kitchen of dirty paper plates and cups and started washing the mounds of dirty dishes. My back turned against the door. I heard a voice. "Hey, girl." I turned to see a familiar face. It was Omar. Omar was Ken's friend that kept me in the loop when Ken was incarcerated during my freshman year. Omar and I had a very short and generic conversation. He went on his way. At some point during the cleaning process, Ken decided that the party was over. Several people came in and out of the kitchen to say their goodbyes, including Omar. When the house was completely clear of company, I was again confronted with a familiar situation, the calm before the storm. Ken walked over to me. "You think I'm stupid?" Before I could answer, he grabbed me by my hair and punched me in the face. He began to beat me mercilessly. Ken pushed me onto the floor and started to kick me all over my body, including my face. He was wearing Timberland boots. I've hated those boots since that day. I started to scream that I was sorry. I didn't know the offense for which I was apologizing, but I was indeed sorry. Ken stopped his attack and knelt down beside me. He grabbed my hair and told me that he would kill me if he ever saw me talking to Omar again. I was shocked. I hadn't interacted with Omar any more than I had with anyone else. I searched my mind for what I could have done that may have been misconstrued as flirting. Although I couldn't think of anything, I assigned a part of the blame to myself, just as I always did. Ken loved me. Even though I never intentionally did anything, I always found something in each violent scenario that I could have done to set Ken off. In that case, I decided that I should have dismissed Omar's conversation. Maybe I shouldn't have allowed him to be one-on-one with me. I knew that Ken had a jealous streak, and I'd obviously tapped into that. I just had to be more careful in the future. Ken released my hair and told me to finish cleaning. I saw tufts of my hair strewn across the kitchen floor. My beautiful hair. I was heartbroken, but I said nothing. I pretended not to notice the hair because I didn't want to further anger Ken. I just did as I was told. I restarted my attempt to clean the kitchen. I didn't rush as I knew I wouldn't be starting school the next day. As it turns out, I wouldn't start school for another week. I often wonder if the school had ever reached out to Mom and Ron. If not, I'm very much aware of the fact that the system failed me. I thought about my middle school counselor, Mrs. Scott. She would have cared enough to reach out. She would have known that something was wrong. I spent the first part of my senior year being absent more often than I was present. Sometimes due to bruises, sometimes due to exhaustion. My mind and my body were both extremely tired. I often thought it would be easier if I wasn't there. And when I say there, I didn't mean at Ken's, I meant in life. At those times, Grandma's words kept me there. I remember her saying that no one who committed suicide could enter into the gates of heaven. That resonated so deeply because I found it asinine to trade one form of purgatory for another. I still held the hope that things would change if I figured out how to keep Ken happy. That was such a foolish expectation. The signs were all there, but my love for Ken was strong enough to make me ignore them. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.